Some foundations have had to cut back the amount they pay out each year. It's typically payout is about 5% of your endowment assets. So the endowment assets for probably the foundations in the United States have shrunk significantly. Some have just lowered their payout. Others have kept their payout the same and basically eaten into their endowment instead of 5%, perhaps 7% or 8%, in the belief that this is when their commitment's needed more than ever. And some, including the Gates Foundation, have started to use other tools in addition to grants, such as program-related investments, where they use the balance sheet in addition to the grants that go out each year to try and help their grantees in the sector. Traditionally, foundations have separated two worlds that coexist inside of them. One is the group that gives out the money, and the other is the group that invests the money. And those that invest the money, their job is to maximize returns. Those that give out the money, their job is to make the world a better place, whatever the social mission that the foundation is focused on, or missions. The two, never the twain shall meet, so to speak. What we're doing is basically borrowing from the side of the house that invests the money in a very small amount, and hoping that we can help galvanize additional money to flow to the other side of the house, the one that helps on the social mission side. It's hard culturally for a lot of foundations, I think, to address that. It's often a Chinese wall between one and the other. The other set of kind of complex dynamics, there's a fair amount of risk analysis that has to go in and a fair amount of financial deal structuring competency. And I think some foundations have more of that than others, and many are starting to move in that direction. One way we think about this is the foundations in the United States today have somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 to $600 billion in endowment assets. Let's take 600 and makes the math easier. If about 5% of that is paid out each year, about $30 billion in grants flows each year from foundations to whatever causes are being addressed. The 95% of the assets that aren't being used continue to be invested. Imagine if you could take an additional 1% of that 95%, 1% of the assets that aren't being used, and support tools like bond guarantees, co-investments with venture capital firms for specific deals that wouldn't get done otherwise, but which will help the grantees that you might work with, below market loans. If you could take that additional 1% and unlock 5 or 10 times the amount of capital flows, which is what we just did with his bond issuance, all of a sudden you've potentially doubled the amount of philanthropy in the country. We just announced a deal last week where we're helping a series of charter schools, you might know KIPP Academy in Texas, issue bonds to build new buildings to house more students, and we guaranteed a portion of the risk using our balance sheet. So with about $30 million of our balance sheet at risk, we were able to help sell $300 million worth of these construction bonds, which is a terrific use in terms of leverage of what we can do with our dollars. I think any foundation could theoretically do it. It comes down to risk and what you're willing to live with in terms of risk. Think about it like a bank. If you have an endowment and you're willing to take 1% of that endowment and put it at risk, then the question is, what kind of risk are you willing to accept? In our case, we try to approach it like a bank would. And we say we're willing to accept a diversified set of risks. And first of all, we want to cover our cost of capital. So we actually charge our programs to use this portion of the balance sheet. And we charge them what we consider to be our cost of capital. And then we try to diversify the risk in terms of the products that we are exposed to, the geographies, the years, all the kinds of things that you would expect a financial intermediary to do. If the economy turns around, obviously grant giving will increase again. But I do think we're on the cusp of a really fascinating period where the amount of financial sophistication on the grant side is going to increase exponentially. Both the kinds of things we're doing, the kinds of efforts that Rockefeller Foundation has started, especially the Global Impact Investment Network, which is bringing together lots of foundations and private sector entities to start sharing opportunities where different costs of capital can actually benefit each other. I do think it's a bit like private equity at the beginning of private equity when the industry was just beginning to start partnering and bringing to bear whole different levels of sophistication which unlocked all this liquidity, that we may see something like that in philanthropy.